GAC membership.
Good evening. Welcome to the January 9th meeting of the Eugene City Planning Commission. My name is John Borowski, and I'm the chair for this year. Let's go around and do a round of introductions for the audience and for the people, the masses that are watching at home.
Brina Galello, Vice Chair.
Kristen Taylor.
John Jaworski.
Elliot Becker.
Bill Randall.
Stephen Baker.
All right, staff, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself at this point, and then we'll move on to public comment?
Sure. I'm Robin Hostick, Planning Director.
And Zach Galloway, Senior Planner with the City's Planning Division.
And I'm Julie Fisher, who is working on the neighborhood.
Great, thank you. We allow public comment at all planning commission meetings. We reserve 10 minutes at the beginning. So if there's anybody who would like to give public comment at this time, please fill out one of the green forms back there and raise your hand or come up, and you can fill the form out later and just come on up, sit in front of one of the microphones and say what you have to say, and then afterwards go ahead and fill out the form so we have it for our records.
Hi, I'm Sue Walling, and I mostly just wanted to introduce myself to you. I'm Vice Chair of the Sustainability Commission, and I'm the liaison to the Planning Commission. So I urge you to have really jazzy, exciting, interesting meetings, because I'm going to be sitting in on a bunch of them. Our work plan has a lot of overlap with yours, actually. One of our focuses is going to be the update of the Climate Energy Action Plan, which includes, land use and transportation, as well as, how buildings are built and energy conservation and all that sort of stuff. So all of that would come before you. We're also interested in housing and whatever comes to you in terms of increasing the supply of housing, whether it's ADUs or whatever. So that's another interest of ours. We're also interested in following up on Envision Eugene and the Santa Clara River Road process, so we're following that. And we also have we're trying to put into action some working agreements that we put together just to try to make ourselves stay on focus and get a little better organized and be more effective. And part of it is having liaison relationships and keeping track and touching base with all the other boards and commissions. So I'm busy liaising. So anyway, so I hope you will contact us with anything that we should know about, and I appreciate Steve coming to our meetings as well. So thank you.
Great, thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you here at our exciting meetings in the future. Does anybody else in the audience care to address the commission at this time? Seeing none, our next item for agenda is a work session on the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. And I'm going to pass it off to staff and let them lead this.
Okay, thank you. As I said, my name is Zach Galloway. I'm the Senior Planner with the City's Planning Division. Joining me today is Julie Fisher with Gito Partners. They've been wonderful in helping us do a lot of the public outreach in the early phase of this project. And then you'll also see a lot more faces than perhaps you usually have at our noontime policy meetings. So joining us tonight are a large number of our Community Advisory Committee members that have been nominated by the River Road and Santa Clara community organizations, which you'll hear about towards the end of our presentation. We wanted to start today, though, and kind of in this transitional phase between the early part of our project, doing a lot of public outreach, and give you an update of where we've been since August, really, in building awareness of the project, inviting people to come out, inviting people to get involved and attend meetings, small group outreach, and the like. So you'll hear that from Julie and I in the early part of the presentation. Then invite Jerry Finnegan from the Santa Clara Community Organization and Claire Strong representing the River Road Community Organization. Invited them up to share a little bit about how they nominated the folks that are here this evening that'll make up the Community Advisory Committee. So with that, I'll just jump into kind of a short presentation to give you some background and maybe a reminder, since it's been several months since we were in front of you all. Just as a refresher, since you guys take a full citywide view of our various planning issues and projects. The Santa Clara River Road, the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan is comprised of those two community organizations. You see here River Road south of the Beltline, Santa Clara north of the Beltline, and Santa Clara, unique to this project and I think just about every other neighborhood or community organization we work with, actually extends beyond the urban growth boundary. So those areas that are outside the blue dotted line there that extend north to Beacon and east over to the Willamette River are also part of this project. So we do have a county staff member on our project management team that we work closely with as well. And you'll hear a little bit about that in a moment. You all have seen this process graphic, but it's a wonderfully engaging tool for us. We've got examples of what the hard copies over here at the sign-in table that we have used as a way to kind of bring people in, and as we've worked with community members and volunteers at the front counter or at the front door of Fred Meyer and Grocery Outlet, and this has just been the billboard for the project that allows us to start the dialogue and conversation with folks when they see what this is. They immediately ask kind of, what is this and what's it about and where are we headed? So we really are kind of in this transitional phase, as I said, going from what you see in the upper left here, this phase one, reaching out, that we conducted a lot of outreach throughout the fall. Some of you, I believe, were able to attend the large community event that we hosted at North Eugene High School, back in October, but we went to great lengths to supplement that and do a lot of small group outreach with folks that we don't typically expect are going to be able to attend a large public event like that. Julie will speak to that more in a moment. Then moving in kind of with this transition, with the nominations of the Community Advisory Committee, we'll be moving into the action plan phase this spring, early summer, looking at developing a vision from all of this input we've gathered over the fall, and taking that through ultimately through next phases of the project, making it happen, and eventually adoption, where we'll be back in front of you, not for updates, but more of the formal process that entails that you all are familiar with. So brought some materials just to share with you. You can see we ask folks, let's see, in our public event, I'll send those around there and here. In our big public event and in our small group activities, we really wanted to ask folks to think about what made these two communities wonderful today, what things they value, what things they want to preserve, why they live there, what's special about them. So we refer to this as the values exercise, and we use these playing cards both at North Eugene High School, where you see these pictures, as well as in our smaller group activities, to prompt conversation about those things, and then that will all feed into this next phase of creating that vision and of those items and places and things that are important. We also ask people to think.
Can I quickly, I don't know if it's now, but maybe integrate what the response, like, was it positive?
Sure.
But it would be great to, and you might already be coming, if not.
We'll get there.
Okay.
We will get We also then, in the second phase of all of these activities, ask people to think long term and what are your hopes and your dreams and your visions for the future. And with that, we did these My Idea sheets. We translated these into Spanish when appropriate, and we of course had those materials. Cards were also available in Spanish whenever needed. So you see there, we ask folks to share their idea. It could be one idea. Some people filled up the page with text. Others drew, so we had colored pencils, and we asked for their vision. And we saw green roofs on top of new branch libraries. We saw new bridges over the Willamette River. We saw solar panels covering every building in the neighborhood, just kind of everything all over the place. And then we, it's our job now to kind of, just with the Community Advisory Committee, with the focus groups in this next phase, to really dive in deep and start to do something with all of this input. So there's more examples of the My Idea sheets of ideas for River Road, more activities along the West Bank Park, just a handful of examples here as you guys pass those around and get a feel for where we're headed. I think it's important to recognize too, it hasn't just been Julie and I doing all of this. There's just about everybody in this room, I think, either attended a meeting, volunteered, or did just an innumerable amount of volunteer hours that were committed to this project. Every time one of our city staff or county staff was there, we always had representatives from Santa Clara and the River Road community organizations there. So I'll just highlight now all the outreach that, kind of these summary reports that we did, and get to essentially the question you were asking. Over the month of December, we started to wind down the outreach. We recognized, as I said, that we had kind of conventional outreach efforts, such as the North Eugene High School community event. We also recognize that there are certain groups in the community that primarily this was identified through the course of developing the public involvement plan that you all reviewed in the summer of 2017 and endorsed, that we needed to diversify that outreach approach. And with that, we did small group outreach to a lot of our community partners and establish those relationships with the schools. So we heard from youth at North Eugene High School, as well as parents at River Road and Irving elementary schools. We recognize that folks outside of the urban growth boundary in rural Santa Clara perhaps were not going to see a city sponsored outreach event. So we made a concerted effort to host a small group of those residents that are outside the urban growth boundary, and did targeted outreach to that group. For obvious reasons, I think the business community has a tough time coming to a meeting in the evening. They're tied to their business most days. So in the course of doing that public involvement plan, we heard from numerous businesses, I'd love to share my input. Please come to me if you can. So a team of a handful of staff and at least 10 neighborhood members walked the entire River Road corridor and did business canvassing with a questionnaire asking for their views on the neighborhood, and kind of in a more targeted way, things that needed to change and concerns that they had, as opposed to visions for the future. It was more about their business, and that'll feed into our economic development work that we'll do. Cajito brings Spanish translation services or Spanish language skills that I personally lack. So we've, as you see on the right side here, we've been able to translate everything. We've been able to also host Spanish language groups or Spanish groups of Spanish speakers to do the exercises and small group activities that, with the cards, with the My Idea sheets, so that we really do get a comprehensive view of the whole community. These summary reports that are now in your packet, and we've distributed over the last month, we've in 3 parts, looks at that more conventional outreach, such as the North Eugene workshop, and attempts to summarize some key points, just big broad themes that we heard throughout. We then published a map that takes comments that were specifically about I think it's the next one, yeah. So we published this online mapping tool that takes every one of those comments. So we're talking well over 500 or close to 600 comments at this point, from the values cards as well as the My Idea sheets, and puts every one of those items that had a geographic point to it onto this map that will allow people to zoom in, see what people are saying about their neighborhood, about things that are important close to them or broadly across the entire community. And I think generally to Commissioner Taylor's point, we haven't tried to really identify key themes or messages at this point. We are simply reporting out. We've collected all of this data, and a tool such as this is our attempt to just be completely transparent and put it all out there. This is actually hyperlinked, so if you all have had the opportunity to check it out, I think it's already open over here. It's a pretty fun tool to just see the range of comments. So this is a very sensitive mouse.
While you're there, Zach,
Yeah.
if I can interrupt, I went
I can't zoom in where I wanted to.
I went to the map today and was trying to find the farmers market locations that were mentioned in the summary. I had a little trouble with the legend, understanding which icon
Okay.
I might start with on that. So just, it was a little bit of a challenge to navigate that way.
Okay,
Yeah.
So
good to be aware of.
I mean, one thing that happened was the people filled out the My Idea sheets, and they also physically wrote on the maps. So a My Idea sheet might not be geographically linked.
sure.
It would be a comment that was written on a map. So really, the synthesis of the information is looking at both of those, but you might not, something that was listed in a sheet might not be mapped unless it was written down.
Well, I was just saying under economic development, main feedback, at least from the rural outreach, was the need for a farmer's market. And it kind of talks like that's somehow identified on the map. And
Right.
I couldn't find it, so.
Understood. Okay.
Elliot?
What I'm understanding is that the city council in general, and one of the city councilors specifically, was looking at where to start in Vision Eugene and get off the launching pad. What I'd like to know is, this is all well and good and you've done a great job. As a commissioner, I would like to know in the next 5 to 10 years in this River Road area, Santa Clara, is there a specific development that is driving this as far as additional housing or businesses? What is the main crux of starting Envision Eugene in this area? What are the changes that are envisioned?
So there's no specific development project. I think the reason we're starting here is in this room. You see folks like Jerry Finnegan, folks like John Belcher and others, Carlene Riley, that have been working on the Scroll Project, Santa Clara River Road Outreach and Learning, and their script efforts for the past 7 to 8 years. They've put in a tremendous amount of effort, built their own neighborhood capacity for doing the outreach, identifying a lot of these issues, and really modeled the way. So there's no specific development project. It's more a matter of the neighborhood's capacity and even advocacy to start here. I mean, the other thing to consider is that their existing neighborhood plan dates to 1987 adoption date, which means it was started in 83, 84 when that process began. So it's probably time for an update.
Right. Well, my specific question is, what are the changes envisioned in the next 5 to 10 years as a result of this?
We'll know as we get through going through the planning process.
I think I'm going to let them finish their presentation, and then we'll move on to the round of questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
So just jot down your questions, and we'll get back to them.
Sure. Well, the only other thing I was going to highlight with this is just that we'll be using the mapping tool in the coming months as we develop the vision and the action plan. This is an opportunity to report out to neighbors that have participated throughout the last several months. It obviously has a tremendous amount of detail, but these I just think this is kind of neat to highlight. That while it does have a tremendous amount of detail, you can also very quickly see kind of some hot button areas, around the belt line, around division. You start to see real intense location of comments. Then we can drill down deeper, with the focus groups, with the advisory committee, and start to get into the details of what the community is saying here. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of concern about congestion around Beltline, so I just use that as an example to highlight the kind of macro and the detailed level that this mapping tool provides folks. I guess I'd like to turn it over to Julie to talk about what we call the inclusive outreach. Thank you.
It's a challenge to try to figure out how to do democracy in planning. And it has been a journey in this project to craft a process that is truly inclusive. And I feel like I've come as close to doing it as I have in any planning project for the past 10 years. So that is, I'm super thankful to have had the opportunity. And I think the key to what has worked is taking the time to develop materials that are accessible and don't require a huge amount of effort to explain things. So that as a base, the visuals, hugely helpful. And I think the other key piece is to recognize that folks that can't get to public meetings can't get to public meetings. And so who are the community partners that we can work with to engage people where they are at, where they're able. And so working, as Zach said, with the schools and Vinny's was great. I mean, we were able to go into low-income housing facilities and do the activity with people that worked there. So provide food. It was a super engaging process. So now the challenge is to figure out how to represent those views. I mean, we had 400 people at the public meeting. There's a gajillion comments. And so when everything sort of goes into the wash, you're like, well, what does this all mean? But really the takeaway, and I think that's a good question, like, what have we done with all this stuff? Well, we are still sitting here going, oh my gosh, so much participation. What does it all mean? But definitely in terms of working with youth, and this is who we identified as, like, who's not going to be able to come to the public meetings but really has a stake in the outcome. It's low income, it's communities of color, it's youth, it's families. And so what we heard from them, because it's a smaller subset of stuff to look at, really transportation rose to the top. It's like just trying to get around. Like, it's difficult. And the walking and biking and transit came up time and again as so important to people's everyday lives. Another key piece, and I know that you've heard about it a ton, is affordable housing. I mean, I was just in a conversation today talking about how the median household income is 46, and so the average is around 43,000 for a family. It's just amazing to try to make it all work. So affordable housing, really, really top priority. Public safety. And somebody in the outreach said something pretty powerful, which is, like, I don't own a car, so I'm out. I'm walking around. I'm, using transit. And so public safety becomes a huge issue to folks that don't own a car. So we heard that a lot. And the last thing, just that focus on community. I mean, time and time again, it's just like, we want more community facilities, we want more recreation. It was this overall sense of belonging that is really powerful in River Road and Santa Clara. And so that's just something that is an opportunity to build on. And so, moving forward, I think the key is to figure out how within the decision-making structure, within the advisory bodies, within elected bodies, how do we continue to represent democratically the views? And so I really appreciate just having the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we've heard through the process and look to continue those collaborations in the next phases.
Let's see. I will jump back over here to our presentation. We, in addition to a lot of these graphics that have been so engaging and helped us kind of pull people in, we've also done, through the work of Christopher Trochi, a photographer at the University of Oregon, a photojournalism major, through the course of our interviews and our outreach, we try to document those groups that are so often underrepresented. So after the meeting, perhaps you'll take a moment to check out his work, which is over here in the corner. That we just grabbed a few of his that are entitled "Ask," but there's a few quotes and just trying to give put a face to the public outreach, so it's not solely just numbers that attended the meeting, numbers on the IP list, and those sorts of things, but that we understand in this setting that these faces are out there. Another thing that Chris helped us do is put together a little video that we shared with City Council, and we wanted to share with you, that highlighted the outreach that has been done really since those summer months to get folks aware of this project and participating. I think you'll recognize a fair number of faces that are here tonight as well. Oh, but it's just going to jump ahead. So I think we can pause for a moment because that was the conclusion of our reaching out update, answer any questions you have about that first phase of the project, and then we can talk about the Community Advisory Committee.
Commissioner Nicolello and then Jaworski.
So I think before we get the ball rolling too much, Zach, could you just kind of talk a little bit about what the context of a neighborhood plan is? It's kind of a wonky thing. Could you maybe just talk about it a little bit?
Sure. So this has come up a couple times. I think in the course of our discussions here, there's a lot of conversation in the community as well as to what's a neighborhood plan, what's a refinement plan, an area plan, what's the difference. We've been using the term neighborhood plan simply because we thought it communicated clearly the area, the geographic area that we were working in. People have some understanding of what their neighborhood is. On that wonky side, we do fully anticipate that once we get to that formal adoption phase, we will be adopting policies and an action plan that'll be part of a refinement plan, just similar to what we currently have on the books with those neighborhood plans, refinement plans that date back to the 80s and 90s. So structurally, we have our Oregon land use law that sets out certain requirements for every municipality in the state. Everybody in the state then adopts a comprehensive plan, ours being kind of two parts at the moment as a metro plan as we transition into our Envision Eugene comprehensive plan. And then these are more neighborhood specific policies and actions that are a refinement of that larger big picture comprehensive plan. So that's kind of structurally from state to citywide comprehensive plan, and then into what we're calling a neighborhood plan, but is a refinement.
So it sounds like it's kind of a mid to long range plan that will have both a policy component perhaps, and then also maybe more specific zoning requirements and things like that that would apply and take a bit of a surgical approach to that specific area?
So that's jumping ahead in our diagram there. If we went all the way back to the process graphic, if I can get back there quickly.
But that's maybe what an end product would look like?
Correct.
With a lot of robust community process that you've already been engaging in and have started that.
So you're correct, yes. So what we're saying is that as we move downstream, each phase will get a little more specific. So the next phase is to look at a high-level vision based on all of this public input. The action plan then tries to look at specific tasks, specific actions, all those little icons on the map. Some of those were, acquire more land for a greenway extension into Santa Clara. We heard that numerous times. So that level of detail would get into an action plan. And then it's, incumbent upon staff to make sure that that filters out into amendments to other plans, other functional plans of other departments, or as you get down, as you get downstream even further into that third phase, making it happen, you're looking at development standards, zone changes, and yes, those more surgical, more land use and regulatory items that sometimes come before this body in the course of land use applications.
Awesome. Thanks,
So each
Zach.
step does get more specific and detail oriented.
Mr. Jaworski.
Yeah, I have two. I attended the large meeting of 400. As I walked around the table, I was really impressed with the engagement by those participating and also the synergy of what was going on. I saw that when you went in the thing there, it said that North Eugene, it seemed to be a similar approach, etc. Did you use the same approach for business? Because when I read this, it said you went one-on-one to businesses. And I'm wondering, did you hand out these cards, and was there an opportunity for the synergy to create, which I think also builds consensus and creates others to think about something that they didn't. But if you're focusing on a business just directly, you're only getting a one perspective. I'm kind of worried about that if you hadn't had businesses come together to hear each other say things.
Great question. So in the course of the public involvement plan that we developed, we reached out to numerous business owners, and we felt like time was limited. So actually their time was limited. So sitting down and trying to step through the game, essentially, with the values-based cards and the My Ideas sheets would take a tremendous amount of time, one-on-one, that a business owner perhaps wouldn't have. So they were invited to those, to the larger public outreach event at North. But when we actually did the canvassing with them, we had developed a one-page questionnaire to ask those specific concerns, issues of concern specific to their business, specific to the area around their business, since they're there all the time and have a deep understanding of what's going on around that location. And then we concluded that with the level of participation they would like to have at future phases. So in order to get that higher level perspective that you're, I think, alluding to, we asked them if they would want to participate in this phase that we're moving into now. We'll have working groups that are specific to each of these topic areas, so parks and natural resources, economic development, land use, transportation. So we offered that to each of the business owners that we talked to and have identified a handful that are interested. and perhaps taking a little bit bigger picture view than just those issues specific to their business.
Okay. My second question is a follow-up to Commissioner Nicolello. When you talk about this, and I can see the relationship to where, whatever you want to call it either updates or amends a refinement plan as an input. But refinement plans vary. I mean, we're having neighborhood plans done in the city, and the neighborhoods are little, and their refinement plans are small. I come from an area that the refinement plan covers 4 very large neighborhoods. So as a result of that, do you see in the future, as this was supposed to be a model being replicated, that would they take a whole refinement plan area, like up in the Cal Young area, and do that, or would they look at each neighborhood independently, depending on where they are, such as River Road and Santa Clara, and preparedness to go? So I'm confused on how one does that, since you're calling these neighborhood plans that feed in.
Sure. I think you're kind of getting into our work planning at the planning division level and asking some of those questions. I think part of that answer goes back to what I described of River Road and Santa Clara and the what I call capacity building. That for so many years it was River Road and Santa Clara's 2 community organizations that were really doing this through scroll and through script with a little bit of city assistance from our neighborhood office and from our planning staff. So they really created their, did their own outreach, identified the issues that we're tackling here. I think by product of history, River Road and Santa Clara get pulled together. So we're looking at this as one large neighborhood plan for both communities together, but I think there's no perfect answer. If we were to revisit the Willa-Kinsey plan at some point in the future, maybe it's right to carve those off into smaller pieces, but I think that just takes on that's a project scoping question you have to tackle one by one.
Mr. Beck.
Hi. I noticed that one of the primary aspects you mentioned was the challenge of transportation. I know that there's a major medical clinic, which many people use, located on River Road, not too far from Beltline. Have you looked at, or do you anticipate to look at, the assistance that can be provided in the transportation and perhaps other areas for seniors and the disabled in that location?
We actually hosted a small group, one of our small group activities or small group sessions was with some representatives of, was it Lila, I think, and the others representing the folks with disabilities and those sorts of concerns in our transportation system. So it's something we're aware of. This next phase as we go from input will be basically taking our existing plans, data, from our transportation system plan, our long-range transit plan, and all those things that are out there, and looking at the inputs and the areas of concern or the priority areas that the neighborhood residents have identified, and then seeing how that aligns with previously identified concerns in those existing plans,
right,
functional plans that are out there. So it's something we will look into in this next phase as we get more and more detailed.
This may be outside of your jurisdiction, but I notice as a consumer quite a bottleneck in the River Road Beltline area, which that's not the only one that has that issue. Are you looking at that at all?
Oh yeah, we're very aware of that. That was one that the general public's identified. One part of this is also recognizing the amount of projects that are already going on with, ODOT is looking at those interchanges, right, and the new bridge crossing. LTD has a separate project that you'll hear about later this evening. So we have to recognize that, as you said, there's jurisdictional issues, and we need to make sure that we're in alignment and we're in sync with all those different moving parts as we move through this.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Randall.
Well, first, kudos to the public involvement part of this, at the front end at least. Seeing that many people at North Eugene High School, and then just the variety that you did of not only having the large group meeting, but actually seeking out those people that maybe don't normally show up, so that it's not all the, what is it, elderly white?
I took men.
I forget. 61. Where do I fall in that? But really, it is often a certain group that comes to the big meetings, and seeking out those people that don't normally come, whether it's youth or Latino or business owners or that, and going to them, I think gives a lot broader input, and even tailoring the input to their specific situation, I think, was good too. So kudos for that.
I'm going to put myself in the queue. Thank you for the presentation. Thanks for everybody coming out. I think that when this process went forward, we were hoping that it would be a template for other neighborhoods moving forward. I think that if we could have this type of success in other neighborhoods going forward, that would be wonderful. I think that these neighborhoods have a leg up because of SCORE and script and all that they've been going through for the last 10 years. I think that it's going to be difficult to generate this type of interest in other neighborhoods, and that's going to be, I think, the biggest challenge moving forward, because the energy has been there and is there in this neighborhood. And I mean, if we, one of the next neighborhoods is, let's say, the South University and Fairmont neighborhood. We do this at South Eugene High School. I tell you, that's not going to be that many tables full, unless we really can work with the tools that you guys have developed here. So kudos to everybody who's been working hard on this, and I'm glad it's coming to fruition. I did want to speak out on a couple of things that I read in the reaching out summaries while I've got so many people in the room here. I went through it and read through, and I was focusing on the land use comments that were made, because that's kind of the ones that are really going to come back through to us, I think, with the decision-making processes. And a couple of things that stuck out to me, and I'm not sure how they will get integrated into these plans, was there were comments about preserving agricultural land and properly planning residential infill and keeping large lot size to allow gardenings. And I'm not sure how all of that is going to work into an area plan, especially the agricultural lands. Once something's inside the city, obviously zoning changes. And so that's something to keep concerned, or not concerned, but just, to be on the lookout as to how that's going to be addressed, because I do understand the value of the lands out in that area. And then the other one about the preserving large lot sizes, I saw that in some, but in other ones there was like, we want to make sure that there's density. And as a city planning commissioner, I have to think about the city as a whole. And I hope that everybody in your group also thinks of that as a whole, because if, we want to preserve our large lots and our single family houses on, a 10,000 square foot lot, but yet we want more density in the city, if that makes it into an area plan in River Road, then the next area plan, when it comes to South Eugene, well, yeah, we want our large lots too, because our lawn looks really nice out front, and why don't you put the density in Bethel or something like that. So keep that in mind, that yes, there's certain characteristics that we want to maintain in the neighborhood, but there also is a trade-off that needs to be done citywide, that this is a community of all of Eugene. And so while I had as many of you in the room, I just wanted to put that out there, because I think the work is being done is really great, but we also have to think macro and micro. So those were my comments. Marie.
So I just want to echo what Commissioner Randall said. I attended the North Eugene High School meeting as well, and I was really excited to see people who were my age there. That was so cool. That like doesn't happen very much, so it was really awesome. And it was just like it was such a phenomenal event. So I just wanted to really especially with everybody in the room, just say congratulations. That was amazing. I'm such a millennial. I posted on Instagram and totally farmed all of it for likes. So thanks, guys. I got a lot. One of the questions I had, and before I dive into it, I really want to see too, the visual accessible media that you've been using has been incredible. Please keep using that. It has been such a wonderful, tangible way to translate this really big thing into something that's actually, I think, a little bit more digestible. And I love also the fact, too, that you've brought in local artists and local photographers into that, too. That really shows this group's commitment to economic development, to fostering the folks in our community. And so that's a phenomenal message to send. I will say, in terms of just the outreach to folks who aren't able to usually be in the room in those big events, I'm curious to know kind of what, with those communities especially, you do have to keep going to them because it is hard to get in the room. So what are some of the ways that you're intending to do that, especially as this material does start to get a little bit more, as I said earlier, wonkish? I'd just be curious to know kind of what you're kind of envisioning that process to look like in terms of really making sure that interest turns into commitment so those folks aren't left out.
Sure.
It might be more of a...
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we recognized is that we need to, is that the volunteers in this room are able to bring in a lot of people. I mean, we wouldn't have had 400 people at North Eugene High School if not for the networks that are already there in River Road and Santa Clara. And in working with Script and then working with the two community organization boards, we've basically committed to assisting them in bringing that broader perspective into the room. So as we move into this phase of vision and action planning, with the Community Advisory Committee, with focus group members that are largely, again, volunteers, we're making sure that those people we've already established the relationships with in this first phase are invited back into the room, and and just so that we have that diverse perspective.
I mean, I think it's really will be important to connect the advisory members to representatives in the community that can speak to the views of folks that can't get to public meetings. So making that personal connection, making sure people get to meet each other, know who to call, like, what do you think? Because, you know, we're in a really happy place right now. And as you mentioned, there will be difficult decisions and trade-offs, and at that point there will be phone calls like, well, what do you think? Should it be this or that? And so instead of just being in a vacuum, there will be people to call and conversations to be had, and at times maybe input solicited. Like when you have a connection at River Road El Camino, you can ask parents quickly and easily what they think. And so those tangible networks, I hope, will be activated at important times to hear directly from constituencies. So, yeah.
And has there kind of been champions established in those organizations? I'm seeing head nods in the audience. Okay, cool. Great. You're all way ahead of me.
Okay, I've got Commissioner Taylor, then I'd also like to hear from Commissioner Baker. Then we're going to move on because we have to approve this board or the committee. So, and we have another agenda item. So Commissioner Taylor and then Commissioner Baker.
I have similar questions, so I'll just follow up and just add to them. One is earlier, really what my question was when you were presenting is really, and you've already covered it, and I'll just add a little, is just what was your response rate? So kind of what's the level of success? And you've talked about that. And the reason why I was asking has to do with the fact that this is really, quite frankly, it's exciting. We have all of our refinement plans are old, all of them. All neighborhoods want new refinement plans. And whether it's the whole neighborhood that realizes they need or want a refinement plan, I mean, all the neighbors might not be as involved or as acknowledge what it means to their neighborhood, but definitely a segment of every neighborhood does. So just recognizing that this really is an important pilot. So what I would just encourage there to be both verbally, transparently, to not only, because here, all of Eugene has opportunity to listen to this, so there's an understanding of the success, what's going involved. So make sure to broadcast it beyond just the neighborhood, this process. So to connect to that, I think we've already talked about this, but I just want to reiterate, it would be great to, hopefully volunteers are kind of tracking your time, or you get an understanding, because it would be great to, I know it's probably a lot, but even if we guess, so that, just to go to Commissioner Borowski's point, is that when it goes to a next neighborhood, say these are the ingredients, here's the outline of, here's how this happened, so that a neighborhood understands. If, for instance, there isn't adequate funding, there's an opportunity for us to update your refinement plan, but this is what it's going to take. So you whether it's modeled identically or not, it's a great case study to just evaluate what the impact is and how to achieve success elsewhere. So that's one piece. The other is, it has to do with kind of what Commissioner Borowski talked about in terms of micro, macro, just the ability to recognize it's a neighborhood that's part of the larger community, and as well as Commissioner Nicolello, just understanding the refinement plan process. So at this point, my understanding, this is really a question, is that this is a visioning segment phase. So is there an awareness by the community at this point? And if not, when will there be an awareness? There are adopted plans that consistency needs to occur, that there is a larger community. When does that occur? Because what I have found, like in our neighborhood, when the first form-based code went through Walnut Mixed Use Station, there's a big difference between visioning and the thought that all those things can be realized, because we're here together and we're dreaming this up, without that context of a larger community or the policies, regulations, et cetera, is that when, it's really Commissioner Nicolello, those next steps. When's that going to happen? I think the sooner the better. It would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. That's the phase we're in now.
Okay, great.
This, as you said, the dream phase.
Yeah.
We wanted to encourage everybody's creativity and to think, to be uninhibited about where the future could go for both these communities. And now, with the help of the Community Advisory Committee and others, we have to put those sideboards on it and bring in commitments that our community has made around Envision Eugene, around the climate recovery ordinance, the transportation system plan, long-range transit plan, all of those things. And so this is where the folks in this room, it all starts to get real, and the vision will start to formulate. Yeah.
Great. Okay, perfect.
Mr. Baker.
Yeah, I probably don't really need to speak, but I just wanted to say I'm so impressed with the level of work done on this. I've never seen a neighborhood involvement plan that was so intensive and thorough and really tried to capture all the community members in some way, whatever way works best for them. And I hope that there's two comments I want to make related to that, because this is me. The hope is this might be a model for future ones, that you somehow archive the material so that if staff changes or the community, you're working in a different community, they don't have any inkling about this process, there's a way to transfer some of that information even if staff changes over time. And the other is sort of a question. I mean, obviously, these efforts, aside from the amazing amount of volunteer time you've got from the community, required some funding. And I'm wondering if this was dependent on that grant for this level of community involvement at all, or it could function without that. In other words, it's more easily replicated if it's not dependent on additional funds because you have some special funds coming in from another organization.
Thus far, this has been city funded.
Oh, that's great.
The city council has allocated funding for this.
Okay,
but
great.
that's still Julie's firm, a couple people in our office, and then all of those volunteer hours that are just invaluable.
That's reassuring. Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, the next thing is appointing people to these committees.
So we've invited Claire Strawn with River Road and Jerry Finnegan with Santa Clara just to share a little bit about how they made the decisions. And as a bit of background and a reminder, this board, the Planning Commission, approved a project charter for this, and one of the roles that was included there was to review and approve the community advisory committee members by design in that charter, and through collaboration, years of collaboration at this point between the city and the two community organizations, we asked the two community organization boards to take on that nominating role. We helped. We hosted an online application tool, and then they went out and beat the bushes and tried to solicit members and participants, not just at North Eugene High School, but I guess throughout all of the fall, really. So Jerry and Claire, if you guys want to share about how you took all of those applicants and got to where we are today, that'd be great.
Well, we were blessed with 22 preliminary applications, and we did some specific outreach to recruit business owners, but other than that, it came from all of the kind of coalescing from all the previous work. Of those, 3 withdrew, and we wanted to have some board members on our. We had 5 slots, so we said we didn't want any more than 3 board members. 4 board members applied. Then we realized we didn't really know enough about all of these people to make any real decisions, so we asked them to submit a one-pager, and we got 16 of those, and then we invited everybody to come to a get-to-know-you roundtable at the board meeting. So we had 13 applicants attend the board meeting. It was really wonderful just to hear from everybody and have a cross talk with everybody. And then people left, and the board elected 2 board members, 2 out of 4 board members that applied, and 3 community members and 1 alternate. So I want to introduce to you the people that we have. So we have some of the people here. The board members who we voted in was John Belcher, who you're familiar with his background. Cameron Ewing is a veteran. He's a U of O student in architecture and is providing leadership for the student research team looking at housing design and diversity. He's also very active with community involvement in maintaining the riverfront, and then we have Louisa DeHeer. She's right there, and Louisa speaks Spanish, did some business startup work in Peru, has a degree in sustainability planning. Let's see. Is really passionate about outreach to the Latino community. Then we have Rebecca Spinson, right here. She's the executive director of the Eugene Education Foundation. She's really interested in bringing the perspectives of young families and of working with schools in sustainable economic development and green spaces. Fabulous. Okay. And Michelle O'Leary, who used to work with ODOT and interested in safety, and I can't read my handwriting, but something like life. Oh, she's been a lifelong public servant, and really kind of knows the the world that y'all work in. And then our alternate is Luke Callahan. He has a home-based business in the neighborhood, focusing on developing people's farming skills. So we're just really pleased with that board.
Great.
As far as we're concerned, we didn't get as many applications. We got 11. And what we decided to do was to hold 2 special meetings for the board. On December 12th, we set up some interviews there for as many as who could come, and there were 3 that could not come to that. But what we did at the interview, and then what I sent to the 3 to respond to, are some prompts. Take 1 minute to tell us something about yourself. What community experience have you had, and what skills do you think you can bring to this process? And what do you like about Santa Clara and would like to see it preserved? And how do you think Santa Clara can be improved? And those are the prompts that people used. And we didn't know all of the people who applied. We went by looking for variety mostly. Of the people that's on our list there, the only ones here tonight is Ed McMahon. Most of you know him. We did not choose Ed because he happened to be the Home Builders Association president. We chose him because he's a resident. He has been working with Script and has at one point was on the board and served as our NLC rep for a while too. So he has a lot of experience in the community, and so we chose him because of that. Ann Vaughn is a board member. We wanted at least a couple board members and a couple people to pass on the Scroll and Script experience. And Ann has been working with me for 10 years with Scroll and Script all the way through. And not only that, but she lives within the city limits in Santa Clara. We wanted to make sure we had at least one person on the CAC that was a city resident, and she does a good job of representing that viewpoint. Kate Purley is in that second picture back there, laughing at the sky. Kate is a local farmer. Lives actually within the urban growth boundary, but has her farm just on the other side of the Santa Clara Waterway. And so she represents someone outside the urban growth boundary, which is something that was needed for the committee. And she too has been working with us with Script forever and is on the board, is on the Santa Clara board. Louis Vidmar is fairly new. He's on the Santa Clara board, but very active, and he's young, and we were looking for youth. And so there's a lot of energy there, and because he spent some time with Script, he has some knowledge he's bringing to it as well. Most of you know Rick Duncan. Rick does not live in the area, but he owns a whole corner of where River Road and Irving meet of businesses, and so he is our business representative. And he wasn't able to come, but he did submit his responses. Tara Cleveland, I will confess I have not met yet, but what she wrote is just so impressive about herself. She said that she actually grew up homeless, and I've lived in area shelters and tents and cars and have been in the cycle of poverty. But then she managed to go through college. She is now she's especially interested in helping the voiceless, and she seemed to, when I read the rest of it, she seemed to know a whole lot about the community and had some of the same priorities that Script and Scroll found everybody else in the community had. And so I have high hopes for her. And Carbello as an alternate, I'm sure how the alternates will work, but Carl is one of those people that that we used to call bulldogs. Someone that says, you know, I like Santa Clara. Best thing we do for Santa Clara is to keep the city out of it. But the thing is that he's been there a long time. He served on the Santa Clara Fire Board for a lot of years, and so he has that experience. And so we want to at least not preclude someone who has that kind of viewpoint. And so, and there were 2 people that dropped out, and 2 people who we rejected are actually, one of them is just starting to get involved with the community now, even though he's lived there for a long time. And the other one confesses that she's been there for 2 months. But she's very interested in the community, so I'm hoping that those 2 will join us with the focus groups, because that's where they'll be useful. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of our people are interested in participating at that level too.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the interest of time, I thank you very much. I think you guys have vetted these people very well. Since we do have another agenda item, unless there is a burning desire to make an alteration, I would entertain a motion to accept these people as members.
I move to approve the nominations of the Santa Clara and River Road Community Organization boards and create the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan Community Advisory Committee.
Second. All right. Any discussion?
I think it's fine for us to vote on the plan, but I think it should be up to the neighborhood to choose the representatives. Even though we're voting on it, I just don't think that it's really our purview to be doing that.
Well, that was part of, as I understand it, that was part of the plan that we voted on earlier in the thing.
Right.
So we're just following through on a plan that we already approved.
I'm just making that point for maybe future plans that it seems awkward to me.
Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I was impressed with your application process. I read the thing. Claire, if you could just indicate to me, who was the second board member? I didn't catch that.
Cameron Ewing
Cameron
and
Ewing.
John Belcher.
Okay, Cameron Ewing. And my next question is just to clarify something. When I looked at it, you really covered all your bases, did an excellent job. Are any of these people renters, just for curiosity, because that was on your application?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, just wanted to know.
Maybe some of us have renters.
Okay.
I think maybe
That's a good
Sarah
question.
Cleveland might be.
Oh, I thought that was one.
Okay. I'm going to call it and just say, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you for all your hard work, and we'll look forward to hearing more in the future.
I thought they had a question about renters on there.
Okay, we are moving on now to the moving ahead. We are moving ahead to moving ahead. Yeah, it was Kristen and
I don't know.
and
I thought your nomination application had a question about renters, homeowner.
It did.
Okay, so they do
tried.
know. It's just okay.
She just didn't know.
You
worries.
know, I'm sorry, I had a question, you didn't call me, but
Oh.
I really want it to be part of the public record.
Okay.
Is that we have one planning commissioner that actually didn't think it was appropriate. I actually think if you look at a micro and a macro level scale, in terms of the advisory committee and the fact that it is part of a refinement plan process, there's a higher level of public accountability and process. So I actually would say I agree with the way it's gone. We didn't micromanage them. It's just a part of accountability. So I just wanted to provide a different perspective.
All right, thank you.
I recognize this is awkward, but could I ask the chair's permission to have a couple minutes to actually talk to these committee members, since I'm the project manager
Yes.
here, but I need to jump back into
Can
this
Chris,
role with...
can Chris start the presentation, do you think?
Sasha.
Okay.
Well, it starts with Zach, but I can provide a brief introduction. Do you want to just filibuster for a few minutes? I'm happy to.
I'm just looking at the clock and we're scheduled till 7, is that correct?
7:30.
7:30. Okay, all right, then, no, yeah, that's fine, go ahead.
Okay. I'll be fast.
We do everything back.
Busy night.
Thank you for doing double duty.
Full plate. Yes, he does.
Well, I can just give a brief overview of why we're here tonight. It's been a while since we've checked in, and we are really starting to gear up for the next phase of intense public outreach in the hopes of getting to a decision point later this year. And so we want to make sure everyone is up to date, and part of that is confirming membership of the planning commissioners who are represented on the sounding board. So today we'll give a brief overview, especially for those who've not heard about or know the details of moving ahead, where we've been and where we're going. Then Chris is going to cover more of a reminder of the outreach we've done in the past, and then I get the task of trying not to be too wonky in describing the technical work we've done and how we are looking at proceeding to a decision later this year. So, and I'm Sasha Leftig with Lane Transit District, by the way.
Thank you.
It's all you. Oh, it is? Okay. She did great today. Okay. So let me change gears mentally. Did you guys all do introductions already?
I'm Chris Henry, City of Eugene Public Works.
You already did your introduction, and you all know me from the previous item. So in addition to River Road Santa Clara, I also wear the hat as co-project manager with these two fine folks with our Moving Ahead project. So we have LTD, the city's Public Works Department, and the city's Planning and Development Department, all represented in this collaboration. We're here tonight to provide you a project update on Moving Ahead. It's been a while since we've been in front of you, and that's because we've been in the midst of very intense technical analysis over the last, they consumed basically all of 2017. You'll hear about that a little bit from Sasha as we get into the presentation. We're in the process now in this early part of 2018 of wrapping up that technical analysis. And we'll be transitioning then into a public involvement phase, which is much of what Chris will be covering. I'm due to that long technical analysis phase. I'll attempt to provide a bit of a refresher for this body, and that's especially important because we are looking for two of you to serve on the sounding board, and we'll get to that I think a little later on. Or rather, towards the end, we'll call that question when that's right. So, going all the way back to 2015, I suppose, we need to answer the question of what is moving ahead. So we've got a map here that shows you the key transit corridors, as you all know them from Envision Eugene work. I think in the TSP it's now key corridors, and something similar in the it's the frequent transit network in the long-range transit plan. Thank you. So we have been focused on the blue corridors here, MLK Boulevard, Coburg Road, River Road, Highway 99, and 30th Avenue out to LCC. But this does a good job of showing you the larger context within which we're working. Springfield is focused on those black dotted lines there, Main McVeigh in their Main McVeigh transit study, and the gray lines highlight the corridors or the MX lines that are already on the ground, Pioneer Parkway and West, or MX West, as the West 11th line is now known. So as you can see, this project is largely rooted in many past long-range planning efforts, but it is much more than just a transit study. We are looking corridor-wide. Part of the reason that planning and public works are also at the table in this collaboration is that it is intended as a multimodal project looking at the best possible investments along each of these corridors for people that are biking, for people that are walking, and then also, of course, considering the land use implications as it relates to Envision Eugene. If we look ahead schedule and where we're headed in 2018, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be wrapping up technical work in the next few months, and then turning our attention in the spring to public outreach and a formal, as mandated by the Federal Transit Administration, a formal public review period, and ultimately getting back to our decision makers, the City Council and the LTD Board of Directors in the fall of this year. As you can see, this project schedule is by month, so it gives you a high-level feel of where we're headed. So I mentioned Envision Eugene already, so I'll make this brief given our time, but Envision Eugene is really one of the underpinnings of this project. We recognize this Planning Commission has heard this numerous times, that with our population growth estimated at roughly 40,000 people over the next 20 years, and our expectations for redevelopment along these key corridors, key transit corridors, we are looking at the necessary investments along each of these as part of this project in an integrated fashion. I've already noted this, so sorry for the redundancy, but we are really looking at transportation for everyone, and that's been a key driver throughout our public involvement. Another thing guiding our outreach in the early stages was how we changed the conversation about transit in each one of these corridors along these main streets of our community, rather than simply asking how BRT or how MX fits here. We've instead tried to take a more tailored approach and understand better what role transit can provide in each corridor. So it may not necessarily be a big green bus with its dedicated lane in every one of these, but instead I think of it more of from a performance standpoint, looking at what makes sense to maintain the frequency and the expectations that LTD has, but taking a more nuanced approach to the design of the infrastructure. With that in mind, we are with each of these looking at a no-build option, meaning we would not build the transit, the enhanced corridor or the MX option, but instead retain the existing fixed route service or the smaller white buses of LTD. We've also, at the other end of the spectrum, are looking at a full-scale MX alternative on each of these, with the exception of MLK, which we're solely looking at the enhanced corridor option. And the enhanced corridor is somewhere in between where we would have some stop improvements, we would have greater frequency, there may be kind of surgical investments at intersections that are experiencing a tremendous amount of congestion in order to maintain the frequency and the speed, but it wouldn't be a comprehensive bus rapid transit system like MX. So this is a new approach that our community has not done before in the past. We feel that it's much more, it's proven to be more efficient. That was the intent, looking at multiple corridors at one time rather than one-off, over and over as we move through the community. The collaboration with the partner agencies is particularly beneficial as we look long range at how the future investment in our transportation corridor ties into and supports the especially from my standpoint, the redevelopment expectations along those corridors, and then, from a public works standpoint, ensuring that we have all those other modes addressed as we're doing this scale planning is really invaluable. The last point that I'll highlight here is the scalability and the fact that we're looking at this more nuanced approach, so that there's potential to incrementally implement these projects rather than kind of waiting for the one large MX corridor, and that's really exciting to think of making progress at a faster pace. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk public involvement, where we've been and where we're headed.
So, thank you. I'd like to reinforce a bit of what Zach said earlier about the integration of the land use planning with Envision Eugene, Eugene's transportation system plan, and lane transit districts long-range transit plan. And it's also more than that. There's, from the city perspective anyway, we have the climate recovery ordinance that's looking to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. And we, in addition, have a triple bottom line analysis that the city will have to apply to this whole process, or at least demonstrate how that was considered. And I can assure you that it is being considered through the process. And then also, we've adopted a Vision Zero plan and developing an action plan, and also developing an implementation plan for our transportation system plan. Vision Zero is important because transit is a very safe way to move people. It's the safest way to move people about our community, as in addition to the active transportation modes of walking and biking or rolling with mobility devices. Those plans also reflect our community values, and that's part of how we engaged people in the past, is to talk to them about what was important to them in their neighborhoods, what were the important places, where were their transportation challenges, places that they felt dangerous, how could we make it easier for them to cross the street, for example, and in general, how could we find, as was in an earlier slide, what's the best transit solution for your neighborhood? And that might be keeping the buses as they are in no build, it might be an enhanced corridor, or it might be MX like we see on some of the other corridors. Part of that exercise that you see in the photos there, as people had slices of, and this is a bit of review, but people had slices of bike lanes, travel lanes, transit lanes, buffered sidewalks, and they had a piece of paper that had what the right-of-way width was in each of these corridors, 5 corridors that we were looking at. And they got to trade off and figure out how does all that fit together if we have a constrained right-of-way, or do we identify a need for more right-of-way, or just how to best use or tailor the transit, walking, biking solutions for each neighborhood. In the future, we're going to likely have similar outreach to what we had in the past. Yesterday, actually, we met with our consultant team that's going to help us with this next phase of work and continue on into some of the other parts of the decision-making that Sasha's going to talk about. So we don't have that public involvement plan nailed down yet exactly, and so it's a bit subject to change. But in general, we intend to have open houses in each of the corridors, have online opportunities where people can engage from the comfort of their home and not have to come to a public meeting. We'll have listening sessions, tabling events. We'll be reaching out to neighborhood groups like we have in the past, and canvassing the corridors to engage with business and property owners, and then as needed, some targeted outreach to interested, particularly I'm trying not to use the word special interest group, but we've had different neighborhood groups like the Lions Club or Rotary, or we might be coming to the Active Transportation Committee and such in the future. And Sasha's going to talk about the decisions to be made. This is the structure of who informs the decision-making process. It's interesting that we've been in this process moving ahead for long enough. It's about 3 years now that the Active Transportation Committee has changed its name from the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And Lane Transit District's MX Steering Committee is now the Strategic Planning Committee. And Better Eugene Springfield Transit changed their name to Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. And all those are evolutions, I think, in a positive way to recognize that we don't just have our own interests in mind in how we plan for our community, but we have a broader connected interest, and I think that's a positive thing. So while you have us as the co-project managers at the bottom, and we're part of a project management team that also includes the consultants that are aboard, and we make recommendations to a oversight committee that is the elected and I better look at my notes more closely. That's made up of city councilors, some of the decision makers, city councilors, the Lane Transit District Board, staff from Lane County, Oregon Department of Transportation. The Sounding Board, where you have representatives, informs the Project Oversight Committee as well, and that is a longer list of Eugene's Planning Commission, Human Rights Commission, Sustainability Commission, the Active Transportation Commission, the committee that I mentioned before, Lane Transit District Accessibility Committee, their Strategic Planning Committee. We have a representative from Lane County Public Health, and that group's charge is to help us guide the engagement and the process, and as the name implies, reflect some of the ideas to get feedback on the direction that we're heading, and also to liaise back and forth with the groups that they represent, so that we have greater engagement through a formal structure that's already in place, in addition to our public outreach efforts. I was going to say less formal, but that's pretty well structured as well. And then, of course, all those groups, the ultimate decision makers are the Lake Transit District Board and the Eugene City Council. And with that, Sasha's going to get the opportunity to talk about a great more level of detail in the analysis.
Yes, so just to refresh your memory, this is the dry, wonky stuff, but I hope to speed through it, but provide enough breadth that it answers your questions and gives you a picture of what to expect in the future. So as a refresher, again, moving ahead is a new approach for this community. We're looking at multiple corridors at one time to really be able to identify what is ripe now for investments and what might be ripe in the future and what might we reconsider then. So we're in phase one right now, where we started looking at what was the existing bus rapid transit and frequent transit network corridors that also mirror the Envision Eugene transit corridors. We've done a fatal flaw as well as a level 1 evaluation, along with the community involvement, to draft concepts that have been advanced as alternatives. So it's really built from the ground up with those initial neighborhood workshops of what the communities along those corridors envision. Those concepts were advanced to alternatives that we've now spent a year analyzing. And so if we can go to the next slide. So the end of phase one is the identification of corridors that are ready for near-term investments. So I'll walk through our thought process and decision-making process that we will see advance this year. So the final outcome of phase one is a selection of a package of prioritized locally preferred alternatives. And if someone can say that 10 times quickly, I owe you some money. So let's break that down for you of what that actually means. Next slide. So in order to select a package of prioritized alternatives, it both takes an environmental technical analysis, what you may be familiar with called an alternatives analysis. That looks at multiple things, including roughly 20 environmental topics to evaluate each alternative, to look at its potential impacts and benefits. It also looks at the project's purpose, needs, goals, and objectives, and the evaluation criteria that are associated with those, to understand how these alternatives look across the board, a trade-offs analysis. And that's typically where an alternatives analysis ends. But what we recognize by taking the system-level approach is we really have to factor in community values and priorities and do an additional layer of analysis through that lens to be able to identify an appropriate package of prioritized alternatives. So, next slide. So when we first started this process, we recognized it was a large endeavor, but we thought it would be simple to break it down into 2 steps. Step 1, we work with each corridor to identify the concepts that are advanced to alternatives, and then provide them with the information that comes out of the alternatives analysis so that they understand the potential impacts and benefits, and they're able to voice which alternative they're the most interested in that we then take to the decision makers, which then step 2 is prioritize those LPAs, so 1, 2, 3, 4, for each corridor. We recognize now that we've been doing this for, as Chris said, 3 years. It's actually not that simple when you're looking at 5 corridors that have system-wide impacts. So next slide. We are looking at a new process where we're talking about packages of investments. So it's still essential that we understand what alternatives each community along the corridor are interested in, so that is shared with the decision makers who are in charge of making the decisions. But then, next, we have to evaluate packages of what might be advanced, what is fundable, based on a set of criteria that really looks at the community's values and visions, community priorities, and comes up with a strategic investment opportunities. So this is just illustrative of what one package might look like, the red being maybe MX and the yellow or orange being enhanced corridor, and then the transparent being a maybe no build, maybe it's just not quite ripe. Next slide. So this is another example of what another package could look like. Maybe River Road is MX, Highway 99 is maybe not quite ripe or maybe a no build, and then Coburg and 30th LCC are enhanced corridors. So we need to figure out how do we put that lens of the community values into analyzing different packages so that we understand the potential system benefits of those packages. And so we've developed a list that we believe is a good starting point for that lens of evaluating different packages of improvements. We have system ridership, transit travel time, capital cost for building the projects, system operation and maintenance costs for the transit components of operating and maintaining the system, different funding opportunities, equity, safety, investments for people biking, walking in the corridor, and then community support. We want to ask you, obviously, this is the list you're seeing for the first time, but do you have a gut reaction? Is there something missing? Is there something that doesn't make sense in that list when we talk about? Yes?
I just have a question as to are there any weighting on each one of them, or do you consider them equal?
We have not decided if there would be weighting.
Usually, you don't build a transit system because it's cheap. You build it because it's potential ridership. So it would seem to me that system ridership should have a high priority. Otherwise, why are you building it? You might as well be ODOT or Public Works building roads.
Very good point.
Do you want us to jump in now?
If you, yeah, or I can.
There's one,
Sure.
only 2 more.
Yeah.
Maybe finish.
That would be great. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So we are working with our consultant team to craft in a less wonky way what that process is, so that when we go out to the public, they can easily understand, and it's very transparent how we're getting to a final decision here. This is a rough schedule, and as we get more clarity around our engagement plan, it will be updated. But we anticipate that as a sounding board, we'll meet roughly 3 times in this year to help with the decision-making process, both providing input on public involvement, getting an initial briefing on the technical analysis and the findings. So right now, it doesn't seem like from the technical analysis there's huge differentiation among corridors, but when we look at a system level at these packages, we're hoping that we will see a clear front runner. And then making any recommendations that the group wants to make, that the sounding board would want to make, would be the third meeting. So we have a lot of work in front of us, but I feel energized. I know Zach and Chris and I had a long meeting yesterday, but it was very motivating that we are coming up with a great plan and are going to have this really important project that is essentially an implementation component of planning that's gone on both for the city and LTD for many years, getting to its first phase of its final decision.
I think it's really important to emphasize what Sasha shared earlier here and what she just said, that the technical analysis isn't necessarily differentiating what's the best solution for each corridor, and that we need to necessarily apply our community values to that decision making to develop packages of projects that might be a different combination of solutions that we didn't think of in a more linear fashion. And if we look at a more system approach, some things might emerge, and that one neighborhood might have different values or needs than another neighborhood. And when we combine those together, we might find a solution that meets the community needs and fits within a fundable budget more than perhaps a different approach to doing that. And also that we're not doing it in a sequential fashion of build one corridor and then another like we have for the last 3 or 4 corridors. I think that's what we're up to in 3. But we're looking at the whole together. In addition to, and I don't think you mentioned it, that comprehensive.
So Lane Transit District is about to engage in a comprehensive operations analysis as well, and we believe this where we are and moving ahead really streamlines well with looking at how the system interacts. And these corridors that we're looking at are really the backbone of the system. They are a frequent transit network. They will continue. They will be our frequent transit network. But what capital investments, can we make in them to make them work more efficiently?
And we would be remiss to not say that these packages also include investments for people walking, biking, rolling with mobility devices in order to serve our neighborhoods and the growth of our community.
Okay, I've got Kristen and myself, Mr. Baker.
Can you go back to the slide with the list that you're considering? It's actually moving. Yeah. So the only observation, just now looking at it, is looking at envision, looking at future. So I'm seeing some, but not what that vision is that's been identified in the community necessarily. So planning for the future, right? Unless that's integrated in there, but more by division rather than general.
So you heard Sasha use one of our wonky terms we try to avoid sometimes.
Yeah.
The purpose, needs, goals, and objectives.
Yeah.
The P&GO. That includes support for.
I figured you probably did.
Well, I just want to explain that this is the value of going down this road because it's included there.
Yeah.
Under an objective that says something along the lines of does the transit support the anticipated redevelopment?
Okay.
And to your point, we're not getting a lot of differentiation there. The enhanced corridor improves the transit service. That's good for redevelopment for more people. The MX does an even better job of that. So it's just this very simple tiered approach. Not building anything doesn't serve those people as well. So this is an attempt to force some sort of separation as we look at these corridors of because right now we're not getting a lot of differentiation. So it's there.
Okay, can I ask one more follow-up question just for clarification? I'm assuming you did this, or part of what you just explained is, so if you dig a little deeper, not just in terms of development, but the more comprehensive approach to Envision Eugene that looks at inventory, where inventory is, access to that future large industrial lots, and it's an employment district. So it's not just development, but the future growth and what that projection is. And I don't know if that's as immediate, because you're looking at immediate funding, so maybe it's totally irrelevant, or not totally irrelevant, but
We didn't go to that depth, but we did look at vacant lands along the corridors as part of the land use analysis.
And the modeling for the transportation modeling used the Envision Eugene future land uses to help generate the trips. So we're considering the effects of the growth there. There's something else that will come to me later.
yeah, because I'm just thinking, and this is really maybe out of context, but just because the jobs aren't there now, maybe if the corridor was there would be the jobs. So just including that as just one other factor. Yeah.
And just to add to that, one way we differentiated between enhanced corridor and MX alternatives in that regard is we expanded the boundary when we look at employment numbers for MX, because we're operating under the assumption that people will travel further to get to MX as a fixed route.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, I've got myself in the queue, then Commissioner Baker, Commissioner Nathaniel, and Jaworski. So, one of the things that I'm glad that you're looking at is system-wide. Because when I look at this map, I see the corridors, and I only see one corridor that has any elevation in it. You know, elevation to me is one of the areas that is most challenged by transit. If you look at Southeast Eugene and Southwest Eugene, you have major elevation, and those are the people that are having trouble even getting to the bus stops. And so, looking at it as a system-wide, especially if we're trying to hit our climate recovery ordinances and Vision Zero, getting those riders that are in the Churchill area in the hills, in the South Eugene area that are in hills that may have roads that don't have sidewalks on them, to maybe not a enhanced corridor right in front of their house, but making sure that they have service that gets them to those enhanced corridors in a reasonable amount of time, I think is very important if we're looking at system-wide. Because if you look at the map, again, the only elevation is the one going over 30th, and that's a point-to-point one. You're not going to be getting a lot of people sitting at the bus stop on 30th. It's just going from low elevation to low elevation over a hill. And so I think that's something that I'm glad that you're looking at it system-wide, because a lot of these ones are able to feed, but if you can't get to them from your house, if you don't feel comfortable riding your bicycle down that hill or back up that hill, you're not going to use the transit. So that's just one of the things. Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, just an observation. We're better able to comment on the material if we get it in advance, so we have a chance to think about it and look at it, not shoot from the hip. So, and also to comment on it after the fact, if you send us a copy of this, we might be able to do that better, because it's not in our packet. Related to this table here, I agree with other commissioners. I think there should be some other categories that I think was already mentioned. I think, and I point you back to the Santa Clara River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan that's got a table here that has, for example, economic development, that has infill development, which you could consider other development. You know, in other words, there's other markers that you might evaluate. It has parks too. I mean, obviously, if if there's a park and it makes it easier to get to, that's an advantageous. And it also has things like trees and, but the point is that there are other categories that I think should really be on there. And I have another one that I think we mentioned, which is not the same as transit and travel time, which is congestion. If a corridor is already very congested, then there may be some, again, you're the transportation experts, but that's, to me, is different than travel time in that people get frustrated by being stuck in congestion. And if this helps to alleviate that or gives another option for a way to people to transit that corridor without being involved in the congestion, that would be of value. That's why I mentioned that I think this list could be increased before you finish your this phase of your evaluation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nicolau.
I'll echo what Commissioner Baker was saying about including economic development. That's definitely, I think, a really important metric package to include. I'll also say, too, I live on 5th and Monroe, so I live really close to the West MX line, and I absolutely love being able to take it into Springfield for meetings. I've been taking it to work. I've been taking it all the way out to Target, and so I can say that living next to that line, that has become such a development amenity, and it's absolutely driving where I want to think about living. So that's a really cool thing to be able to say, and I hope that it's something I can say in 10 years when we have more options in our community, even more than we do now. So excellent work on moving this ahead. I've heard from one of your employees that it was about 12, maybe it was either 12 or 22,000, but either way, it was a really large number of pages of things to look at. So thank you for that. I'll say in terms of some things that I would like to see, I think that when it comes down to system ridership, understanding that the system functions maybe differently for people who are choice riders and then people who are riders who have to ride either because they can't drive or something like that, and that the system does function in different ways for those folks, and they might be trying to get to different places. So just really thinking about that. And then I think the other thing I would be really curious about, maybe not to the extent that I would want to see these things necessarily weighted, but I will say with West 11th, with the portion of the MX line that I'm on, sometimes crossing 6th Street feels like a game of Frogger, as opposed to getting to my transit stop. And you know, the casual reference aside, and I don't know how much of that had to do with the fact that it's ODOT or things like that. I imagine, having worked with them before, that could play a rather large role. But just thinking in the future about making sure that we really have that balance, even though it is the largest multimodal project, and it did put in a lot of really important infrastructure. The infrastructure still isn't the most pedestrian or bicycle friendly in the world, and especially to meet our Vision Zero goals, that's just something that I would want to see personally carried very, very strongly, because if we can't walk safely to the bus stop, then it's not much strong in that regard. So it sounds like something I'm seeing some head nods from Sasha. So
Yes, if I could speak to that. You are right in foreshadowing. There are certain reasons that 6 feels the way it does in terms of it is an ODOT facility, and there were certain requirements we had to follow in terms of vehicle travel time, especially freight. With these corridors, the only one that falls under that category is Highway 99.
Okay.
And we had early on said that obviously looking at a complete street is a major goal of this project, and one of the main questions when we started having the conversations with the community is, where do you feel safe, where do you not feel safe along this street?
Okay, so it sounds like much of this will function a lot more differently than perhaps what we've seen with even like Pioneer Parkway, for example, too. Okay.
Yes.
That's very helpful, thank you.
The city's standards have changed with the adoption of the transportation system plan. Our level of service standards have evolved.
Okay.
As a profession to provide transportation services, we're looking more in a more balanced way, and that means moving away from a level of service standard and considering that that metric doesn't necessarily make streets safer. The fact that Eugene has a Vision Zero plan and the state has a goal of 0 fatalities or serious injuries by 2035 changes how we look at providing ways for people to move about. That's different than when we even started moving ahead versus when other corridors were planned.
That's really excellent to hear.
And I'd be remiss without mentioning LTD also has adopted a Vision Zero policy, especially what we can do to support our partner agencies.
Excellent. Thank you.
Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I know you're doing a lot and you're looking at, for lack of a better term, transit systems maybe in a different way, and I've looked at them another way, and that's why I sort of felt ridership should be an emphasis. I go along with some of the other commissioners. I think congestion is a factor that you should consider, especially since the council has said they want to look at corridors. So we're already looking at corridors. They're like the spokes of the wheel, and they all come into downtown, which to me means a destination. One of your factors that I don't see there are destinations. Now, it seems to me that ought to influence a corridor. Some have spoken of corridors that they travel. I travel the Colbert corridor, and when I travel the Colbert corridor, there's all kinds of destinations. There's shopping centers, there's grocery stores, there's medical center development, and at the end of that particular corridor, there's also CHAD, which is now a business thing, and the vet center, and all of those things that are happening as destination centers. And I'll throw a plug in, not to mention that we've got 1,800 new units, multifamily, built up there. So we have about 6,000 plus more people coming right into the end of that route. So it sounds to me like, that's why I said, well, geez, why are you building it if you're not going to have ridership? And ridership is places to go. And I think that economic development is a good one, either to serve existing, or cause new development to occur because of that corridor. I just want to make those comments.
Thank you. May I ask a quick follow-up question in terms of congestion? I imagine you mean both, but I just want to make sure existing congestion and future congestion, or are you more focused on existing?
Well, on the road that I mentioned, we have already so much existing, and I don't want to look at the future. I'm hoping that there's another way to travel on the Cove Road rather than walking would probably be faster than car now anyway. So.
What I was hearing about congestion was not necessarily reducing congestion for people driving cars, but using transit as a way to bypass the congestion in the corridor. That's what I heard from Commissioner Baker.
Bypassed it? I don't think the congestion's on the corridor. How do you put the transit on the corridor and bypass the congestion?
Signal priority is one way to do that.
Oh, yeah, okay. You move through quicker because of a prior. Okay,
and you move people
about picking as a secondary.
No, and you move people more efficiently by having more people in one vehicle instead of single occupant.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. Reduce congestion, put more people in the vehicle, and that gets them off the road in their cars. That's what I'm looking at as a way to reduce it.
So it's a lot of things.
Besides what you're talking about, which is improved efficiencies.
I think we're saying all of it. We agree with all of that.
Okay.
Commissioner Taylor.
I just wanted to ask about this package, because right now, like Commissioner Baker said, we didn't have a preview of it. I recognize we're not part of the approval process, but what would you add? It sounds like an ongoing question, so this is something that really we can think about and get back to you if we
Commissioner Baker, and then we need to have a discussion about who the members of the sounding board are going to be.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment or observation too, since I've been going to a number of the bicycle pedestrian staff in the city. One of the concerns are actually complaints about the new MX was the lack of pedestrian islands out where it gets to be so many lanes wide. And the reason I mention that is because when you're looking at this and looking at costs, I think it makes sense to program those, in other words, not replicate the issue there where there aren't any pedestrian islands and you got so many lanes of traffic to get across. People will cross no matter what. So you need at least, if you have some pedestrian islands up the middle, two-way streets, then at least there's a place for somebody to stand and not be in the middle of traffic.
They're included in the alternatives. We identified more crossing opportunities and safe refuge.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think of them always as planned crossing opportunities, but just make sure that they're included in your costs so that they're that, because I think that's a valuable thing to add in ongoing planning for these new quarters.
Yeah, one of the ways you'll see that is when we are able to publish the technical analysis, we have a breakdown of types of investments so that you're able to see what is a transit investment and what is an investment for people walking and biking, so that at the end of the day, when we have a program of projects, if we're not able to fund a large MX project, for example, we still can take elements of that alternative and fund them when opportunities arise.
Okay, next question. Any other commissioners that haven't spoken yet need to make a comment at this time? Okay, so the next question is, who are our members of the sounding board?
So currently, when you all had a discussion of different subcommittee volunteers, I think in the fall, November of 2017, and 3 of you volunteered, Jaworski, Randall, and Nicolello, with an alternate as Baker. But in the charter for this project, we only have 2 seats for planning commissioners to sit on the sounding board. I'll put a plug in for Commissioner Jaworski for continuity's sakes, because he's been there all along. And then we'll, so if he's interested, we would welcome him back. And then the question just becomes, who of the remaining 3, Randall, Nicolello, and Baker, are interested in filling a seat that was formerly held by Commissioner Mills before he left?
We talked on the phone. I dropped.
So,
Yeah, we're good to go.
There's just one left.
all right. Should I break out a coin here, or?
I don't think we have.
It's an alternate.
Yeah, it's Jaworski and Randall.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Are we okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Pretty cool.
And if you're not, I'll throw my name. No, I'm kidding. No, we've got 3 minutes left.
So that was the piece of business we really needed to cover.
And so I would still remain the alternative and would attend one of these.
And so, in that, I would say also, if there's any packets or anything go out, please make sure that Commissioner Baker gets the information and is on the interested parties list, so that if he needs to step in, he's up to speed as far as possible.
Can I ask you a favor? As long as it's can I be on? Can all of the planning commission be on that listserv so we get notifications? I'd love to stay up to date, and it's much easier than me actively going on that side. Yeah. So.
Just to clarify, the interested parties list, or the when we send packets out for the sounding board members?
All of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
if we can.
she would like to be on that.
Yeah, but it's
I don't need that whole packet.
Do we
Interested parties would be fine by me.
do we need a motion to appoint our sounding board members, or
No, I think
Was that it?
It was
Okay.
it was just a clarifying so that we knew moving forward. Moving ahead. All right. Any other business? We are right at time.
Do we have an updated calendar that we might be able to receive until future? I mean, you don't have to. In other words, just a suggestion. It would be useful to have that, so we can plan.
When we set the dates, we'll let you know.
I don't know.
No, our commission.
Talking about planning commission calendar in general.
Just a suggestion.
We'll let you know about moving it up as well.
I will say, just very briefly, there was an item scheduled for January 22nd, and that item has been moved, so we're rethinking the agenda for the 22nd. We haven't figured it out yet, so that's new information. Just thought I'd put that out there.
Great.
Just a question to staff. Are we expecting any
appeals?
Yeah, quasi-judicial in the near future that we might need to allow time for?
Yeah, you'll be the first to know.
Okay, all right. Well, we won't be the first to know.
You'll be the second to know.
All right. Thank you. We're adjourned.